Hello everyone and welcome back. In this video, I'm going to sort of go off the beaten track a little bit and talk about the murder case, this Bryan Kohberger case that's going on in Idaho right now. And I was asked, because I was a prosecutor many years ago, what did I think about the fact that the prosecutors out there had apparently made a deal where the defendant was going to serve life in prison as opposed to potentially facing the death penalty without speaking to any of the victims' families. So I was an assistant state attorney here in Palm Beach County from 1994 to 1999. I was also a certified legal intern in 1993. And I've tried everything from petty theft to capital murder cases. And so, one of the things that was really preached to us by my state attorney, who was Barry Krischer, was number one was about ethics, right? And what I mean by that is, you don't cut corners. We don't charge bargain, meaning we don't upcharge, file a case, charge more than we should have done, and then, plea bargain the case down to make it look like we gave somebody a sweetheart deal. We also obviously don't suborn perjury. And obviously the big thing was obviously if we have somebody that we believe is innocent or who is in custody and shouldn't be, we got to make sure that they don't get prosecuted, and also that they shouldn't be kept in custody. Now, one of the other things that was really important to us was when we were dealing either with a victim, could be a victim of a violent crime, or in the case where there's a murder involved, the victim's family. Now, I think one thing that's important to understand is that as the prosecutor, your client is not the family, your client is the state. So when it says state of Florida versus so-and-so, it means the state is the prosecuting entity, the plaintiff, as you were, versus whoever the defendant is. It's not Mark Astor versus the defendant. It's the state of Florida. So the state of Florida would be my client, okay? And as an assistant state attorney, I'm representing the state in the particular case that I'm handling. Now, when it comes to victims and victims' family, and I'm going to talk specifically as if this case was in Florida, but I can't imagine things are a whole lot different in Idaho. The victim or the victim's family is not our client. However, they have certain rights that have to be respected. Now, one of those is the right to be heard. And what does that mean? It means, and also the right to be notified of any hearings. That means that the victim's family, or the victim, if there's not a decedent, is entitled to be told, hey, we have a court hearing tomorrow. You have a right to come and be present. You also have a right to address the court and to be heard. Now, when it comes to negotiating a settlement of a case, we would typically, at least standard protocol when I was a prosecutor, was to consult with either the family or the victim's family, the victim or the victim's family, and say, hey, listen, I'm going to work this case out, or there's a proposal for a settlement of the case. What do you think? Now, sometimes the family would agree, and sometimes they wouldn't. Now, if they did not agree, I would say, look, this is the way I think the case should be resolved, and here's why. Perhaps there was an evidentiary problem. Perhaps there was a witness problem. Perhaps I thought that the victim's family was being just a little too, aggressive in terms of how the case was worked out. And I would say, look, this is what the state is proposing. The case is going to be heard before the court, today, tomorrow, next week, next month, whatever it happens to be. And at that hearing, which is going to be a sort of what we call a plea conference, where the court is going to hear the plea that has been worked out between the state and defense, and then the court will decide if it's going to accept it. If you don't agree with the way we've resolved the case, you have a right to come to court and tell the judge, sorry, I don't like the way the state has resolved this case. You don't get to dictate how we handle the case, because remember, you're not my client. But you do have a right to be heard, and you have a right to object, and you have a right to tell the judge you don't like the way this case was resolved. Now, I think from what I'm hearing and reading about what happened in Idaho, they worked this case out, and they didn't bother to consult with any of the families. And I'm sorry, I just have a very fundamental disagreement with how this all went down. Look, this is a case where you had 4 people that were murdered. and now you're telling the family they don't get their day in court, they don't get to be heard, they don't get to get justice. Okay, and you can hardly blame them for wanting justice. And the state has basically said, okay, we're resolving this case. Sorry, you don't get to tell us, what you think about this, or you don't get to be heard. And I think this is totally inappropriate. I don't know if there's an ethics violation here, but certainly in Florida, this would never happen. Not when I was a prosecutor anyway. And so for the people that have been asking, what do I think? I think it stinks. I think it's totally inappropriate. I think it's wrong. And shame on the prosecutors in Idaho for not even bothering to consult with the families on this case. This was their loved ones. These were the young people. These were college students who were murdered in cold blood by this guy, who apparently is willing to admit that he committed these heinous acts. And to not give the families an opportunity to be heard before you basically throw them all under a bus, I'm sorry. That is totally unacceptable, and I think that I don't know if it's a district attorney or the state attorney, whoever the elected official is in that particular county, needs to answer for the fact that this case has been resolved basically through some kind of backdoor deal. It's not right. If the families had been consulted and at least been heard, and there's for some reason the state thinks this is a good idea, and perhaps it is. I don't know all the ins and outs. Certainly, the case is done. There's appeals are waived. This case isn't, obviously when somebody's convicted, on a murder case, especially if the jury recommends death, I mean, there's going to be appeals up the wazoo for years and years and years. So I can understand why they might want to resolve it. Maybe they had a witness problem. Maybe they had an evidentiary problem. Maybe there was an issue with the DNA, DNA evidence. I don't know, because I'm not obviously the prosecutor on the case. But the bottom line here is that it's totally inappropriate. It's just not right. The families should have been told what was happening and at least given the opportunity to object and say, sorry, this isn't going to fly with us. I realize the state's going to do what the state's going to do, but we want an opportunity to object. We want our input heard. We want our voices heard. And so, not right. I'm not happy about it, but it is what it is. And that's my 2 cents. Anyway, thank you for tuning into this very different video. I'd love a thumbs up. If you could subscribe to the channel, I'd be grateful. And with that said, see you in the next video. Bye-bye.